Welcome to the Medovia Menopause Podcast, your trusted source for information about menopause and midlife. Join us each episode as we have great conversations with great people. Tune in and enjoy the show. Welcome back, everyone. Our guest today has been called the architect of the campaign to squash the tampon tax, which tells you she does not do this work quietly. Jennifer Weiss-Wolf is an attorney and author and the executive director of NYU Law's Birnbaum Women's Leadership Center. She leads partnerships and strategy at Ms. Magazine. She's testified at the White House and before Congress on menstruation, menopause, and the law. And her 2017 book, Periods Gone Public, got called The Beginning of Liberation for Us All by Gloria Steinem herself. She has a new book coming this October, which we're really excited about, called When in Menopause. And she is exactly the person we want walking us through where this movement has been and where it is going. Jennifer, welcome. Jennifer, take us all the way back. What pulled you into this work in the first place before it was a movement with a name?
Well, thank you for asking that. In part because my origin story, I think, in the menopause space looks a lot different than other folks who are, such important voices for improving menopause care in this world right now. I did most times, I feel like people are either physicians or clinicians who understood, on the front lines what was missing from people's, their patients' experience, or it was people themselves who were having challenges in navigating menopause because there was no vocabulary, there was no, formal framework for what it looked like to understand the challenges and forge solutions. I had a perfectly fine and kind of unmemorable menopause experience, but it's that I am an advocate who's been in the space of menstruation and public policy for quite some time that I became really curious what this next chapter looked like in the realm of public policy. It was in 2020, actually, and it was the pandemic, and I was experiencing some symptoms of menopause myself, and I was sharing them with a friend with whom I do menstruation-related advocacy, and she asked me, what's the landscape for menopause policy? And I said, I don't know. And she said, I would think you would want to know. And I was like, I would think I would want to know too. So there it was. That was November of 2020. And I decided that after 5 or 6 years at that point of being deeply embedded in menstruation related public policy around things like the tampon tax and free period products in public facilities, that it was time to turn my attention to what was inevitably the next chapter.
Yeah. Well, you've been an advocate for menstruation for a long time. I loved your first book, Periods Gone Public, and I was sitting in the menstrual health space at that time too. So it's interesting that you're moving into the menopause space and advocating for that, as I am, in a completely different way too. I think, that's what happens through conversations like you just mentioned. But there's a through line here with menstruation to menopause, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. That through line, how does the fight over periods actually connect to the fight over menopause? And I use that term fight loosely, but it is a fight.
It is a fight. And this is a political and public sphere, and these are needs that haven't been met. So advocating for them is making a demand that hasn't ever been considered. So it is a fight. Fight doesn't have to mean, it's a bloody brawl. Even if it's a little bloody, but it is part of, the energy we bring to this. In some ways, there's a lot of similarity because it's, when you think about just bodily functions we're not accustomed to talking about in the public sphere, that's a big hurdle to have to, to get through. Although I found in the menstrual space, it was a pretty quick one to chip away at. If people in the media or legislators or other people in positions of influence weren't willing or interested in talking about it, they only looked foolish. It's a natural bodily function and occurrence. And by not talking about it, society had sort of left open a wide array of challenges and problems that had fairly simple solutions that could be applied, at least in terms of public policies. I understand and appreciate that breaking down stigmas and all of the baggage that comes with that is not a simple path, but the policy solutions themselves weren't that complicated.
Mhm.
I was really surprised when I first started exploring menopause, how different it actually was, at least in terms of what public policy could offer. I assumed that the stigma and the silence was the main culprit. And I was really, I think, surprised to find out, one, that there hadn't been as much silence over the past century, especially in halls of power and politics around menopause than I might have guessed. It's been actually a pretty robust conversation and debate and fight, even though it hasn't always gone in directions that were purposeful or useful or that didn't actually set us back, which is,
Yeah.
where this last chapter has left us. But also that there is so much when it comes to science. There is so much research that has been unstudied. There is so much investment that has been ignored or certainly undermade, that there was an entirely different set of circumstances to have to wade through to come up with what the policies that could create improvements would be. Whereas for menstruation, I think they were much lower hanging fruit.
Mm. So menopause is more complicated. It's not as simple as having your period, tampon tax.
At least
When
in
I
terms of the correlating policies,
Yeah,
yes, I would say
yeah,
that there is a lot more complication to wade through.
yeah. So what surprised you the most?
That is what actually
That,
surprised me the most.
yeah.
When I started this work, I mean, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. I got to know a lot of doctors and medical experts
Mhm.
and people who either had scientific expertise or saw patients. So I really did start to learn this world through their eyes. And I guess that threading that needle, the way I describe it often is the analogy I use or the visual I try to bring is like a ball of yarn. If you had a ball of yarn and you threw it across the floor and then you wanted to wind it back up, it wouldn't be very hard to do. Like you would just roll it back up. But if you had a ball of twine, it would get all like
Mm.
sticky and kinked out and, pull in different directions, and it would be a lot harder to put back together. And that was how I felt about menopause. Every time I thought I unfolded something, I would discover something else that was exacerbating it. There's not a single like deficit in the menopause space, whether it is education, whether it is
Yeah.
research, whether it is funding, whether it is, how we consider the workplace and the important
Right.
work that you do, that doesn't come with a flip side or another consideration or another challenge all the way across, all the way across the room, that when you fix one thing, you maybe inadvertently trigger another.
Yes.
So that was what was so, I don't know that I was surprised by that, but it is so complicated, and it's really hard to boil down to a single talking point or a single op-ed or a single, policy proposal or a single, proclamation of what it is we want, because everything has a catch,
Yeah.
and everything has a counterpoint. And I know that might sound vague for listeners, and we can unpack what some of those are, but that has been my experience, is that nothing had just a simple linear path.
Yeah. Well, we find the same thing. I mean, there's triggers on the other end. Every time you pull a lever, there's something on the other side that you have to consider, including varying opinions. So there's very strong opinions that we are seeing with individuals, both men and women, who would say, why are you bringing this up? Why are you talking about this? There's enough ageism that I faced in the workplace, specifically in what we do and our focus. Why are you adding this to the mix? Why are you calling it out? So I'd love your opinion on that.
Yeah,
As well.
I get that feedback too. And it's interesting because when I think about the workplace in particular, and I'm eager to have the conversation because I know we have like a lot of even among us, we have a lot of varying thoughts and opinions and ideas about it. I do think that we have to plow through uncomfortable pieces of it, or it's more than uncomfortable. It's the aspects of it that make our lived experiences stand out. I mean, surely the the people who fought for protection from discrimination on the basis of pregnancy or other attributes or characteristics that were specific to women received the same blowback. But the idea that our bodies are distinct and workplaces and the economy have an obligation to have an obligation for all kinds of reasons, for social justice reasons, but for economic reasons too, to ensure the I don't know, the most practical and pragmatic and manageable workplace. I don't know. I'm getting lost in my words here. I might need to edit out this piece of it. But the idea that our distinct needs need to be met is really important. The thing about and I'll say that the thing about the workplace and the idea of workplace benefits, which I know are becoming more and more popular, and it's really important that there are organizations like yours ensuring that they are pragmatic, that they are thoughtful, that they are meaningful to a wide variety of employees. All of those things are true. I think at the same time, what is also true in this country, and this is where the lawyer, the kind of wonks like me come into play, is that our anti-discrimination protections in this country are so insufficient that I worry deeply about navigating a space of accommodations or acceptance or acknowledgement before or while we're still figuring out what those discrimination protections should and must be. That's the piece I think that I'm pretty hung up on.
Yeah. Unpack that a little
Yeah, I
bit
was
more
just gonna
for
say,
us. Yeah. Tell us more.
So when we think about the various accommodations, for example, on the basis of pregnancy that have been forged in this country, and the agencies, the Department of Labor, the EEOC, that have been responsible for thinking through and managing what those accommodations are, we've had a pretty robust legal movement as well, to ensure protection on the basis of discrimination on pregnancy.
Right.
So we've been successful as a country in plowing forth with laws like first the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, and now the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act more recently, that can balance the need and demand and scope of accommodations with assurance of protection and a classification from discrimination. We don't have any such thing for menopause right now, and where it might even squarely fit. So in my book, I look at things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. I look at the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. There has been legislation that on the basis of discrimination on the basis of age that is part of traditional civil rights legislation, and new bills that have been introduced too. Menopause doesn't fall squarely in any of those, and might be well served to find its own home, or some creative lawyers might think very strategically about which pieces of each of those legislation menopause could fit. Lawyers in the UK have been doing that work, and they have created and codified discrimination protections. They haven't really tested them that fully yet. And theirs fall somewhere between gender, age, and disability.
Okay.
And I think that we'll probably be headed in a similar direction. And there is definitely an appetite in Congress to tackle this. I don't think there's a clear path at this moment in this political administration to see this through, but this is certainly the time to be seeding, SEED seeding, that kind of either standalone legislation or reads of currently existing legislation. But right now, what I truly worry about is somebody who has a very menopause forward organization, and perhaps they've worked with Medovia or others to get there, and in the wrong hands, taking advantage of those benefits, could find somebody on the receiving end of harassment or discrimination, and that they would not have adequate protection under the law.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Let's
I
talk about the
see.
law a little bit. I'm curious, like, when did menopause specifically show up as a legislative issue? And like, when does that actually begin? Because we've been watching other countries, UK being one of them, Australia, another one, like having this happen. But what do you see in terms of where specifically it's showing up, and what's the future look like?
Yeah, so it's shown up in random court cases that have either been on the basis of menopause or where menopause at least played a central role, where a person argued they were fired or otherwise discriminated against because of their menopausal status. And I can't rattle off case names. Sorry, they're in the book.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Yeah. We'll get your
it's
book.
not that I can't do it for any reason other than that they're not coming to my head right now. But in one case, for an employee who was going through premature menopause, the court did find that the Americans with Disabilities Act would apply because it wasn't a normal menopause for normal. For other employees, and really, I can count them on one hand how many cases there have been. So it's not like there's been, heaps of judicial opinion to parse through. But by and large, menopause as a normal condition of our bodies has not been afforded protection under the laws that were brought to bear. In 2017, I think it was, there was a case of a employee, I think she was a telephone operator, in Georgia, who was perimenopausal and was having extremely heavy menstruation and bleeding, and bled on her chair and stained her chair, and was fired for that. And while the argument around menopause was raised, it was never adjudicated. So we're really left with very little. Legislatively speaking, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which is the newest piece of legislation, at least that we as a country now have access to, was signed by then President Biden in 2023. It does not mention menopause overtly, but it does address conditions related to pregnancy. And menstruation has been acknowledged as a condition related to pregnancy. Many people stepped up and argued that menopause or perimenopause, both of them, should be included similarly as menstruation as a condition related to pregnancy. The EEOC did not weigh in on that when it issued its rules for the implementation of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, but they provided a bunch of hypothetical scenarios in which the law could be leveraged, and menopause was an example in one of those hypotheticals. So at least that indicated that the leadership at the EEOC at that time saw a pathway or an open mind to including menopause, but it's not written in it in any concrete or overt way. And, the current leadership of the EEOC obviously has very different priorities.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't hold out much hope, at least in the here and now. But I think what the future looks like is folks like all of us and this really robust emerging movement of everybody from clinicians to celebrities to the media, being really clear and concrete about the need for those protections, especially as we see
Yeah.
state legislatures, and we can talk about that for a bit as well. What's happening in the states and why there's been so much momentum and interest and energy towards a wide variety of legislative, protections or what would be the word, like interventions to improve menopause care. We've seen at least one state, Rhode Island, and one municipality, Philadelphia, call for both menopause accommodations as well as protections, or that pregnancy-related discrimination protections should be stretched to include menopause. So I think it's really important that they did both, not just one. And we'll probably see more of that. Michigan put out a memo from the governor's commission on women to explore more robust menopause workplace accommodations and protections. And Virginia passed the law as well, although Governor Spanberger did not sign it. She vetoed it and called for more research. So I think it's a really open road right now. And what would be really important, vital, as far as I'm concerned, is to make sure we're talking as much about the discrimination protection as we are the scope of accommodations.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's never siloed, right? We have to look at the big picture, and there are many, we always say there's many levers that you have to pull. You can't just look at one piece of the puzzle because they all fit together, to your point. Do you feel like the statewide movement, I guess I will call it, in municipalities, do you feel like that will drive organizations to implement change? Because right now, I mean, the conversations that we had several years ago with organizations was really building that business case. And it was convincing organizations that there was a return on investment and this is a real thing and you need to look at your bottom line. But now we're moving more towards conversation that includes legislation, right? Am I going to have to do this? Because there's a lot of organizations just sitting.
Most companies in this country probably shouldn't have to worry about having to do it. We are not there yet. In the UK, they will have to do it in 2027, right. At least companies of a certain scope and size.
That's right.
I don't think we're quite there yet here in the US. And I think that companies, I'm sure they're in part driven by bottom line, and you obviously have front row seat access to hearing them, engage on what that looks like for them. I think that many of them, honestly, and this might sound a little cynical, might be swayed by the media and the kind of public attention they could get for doing it. It's certainly in vogue. Menopause is very popular, and it gets very popular, public attention. I think that I would be thrilled to see more legislation, and the best legislation in more states, and potentially federally at some point in time. I think that from my perspective, I also want to see CEOs do more than bring that perspective to bear inside their workplace. I want them to use their platform and their voices to push all of the reforms that are on the table. Of the state legislative reforms, for example, we just named the handful that have engaged in workplace, but 26 states have introduced more than 60 bills over the past, 2 sessions, focused on everything from improving education among providers and clinicians, as well as the general public, about menopause, to ensuring that menopause care and treatments are covered by insurance, including public insurance, Medicaid, including private insurance, whether through employers or otherwise. And I would like to see CEOs and people who have platforms of that scope and size use their voice and their resources to push the full agenda. At some level, people will argue that if we solve, some of the broader issues about access to care and treatment, we perhaps diminish the need for workplace information and accommodation because people will be better treated and better cared for and be burdened less by aspects of menopause that might otherwise now benefit from support in the workplace. We're probably pretty far. It's hard to imagine anything that black or white or either or. It's it takes a long time for change to happen. In particular, and the thing we haven't talked about and we haven't really seen yet in the state legislatures is a commitment to research. Research may be sort of the number one smoking gun and unaddressed matter, and the lack of commitment we've had, both because of, some of the certain circumstances that apply to menopause, but also because women's health research is chronically and dramatically underfunded in this country by the major vehicle for research support, the National Institutes for Health and other federal agencies. One reform that I'm really eager to see is for states to start stepping up and using their own state university oversight and influence to fuel research that the federal government might not or will not fund at the moment, and whether that could bolster it, whether that could set an example, whether that could, create a new future for research going forward. I think that would be really exciting. And taking it back to the CEOs, that's the kind of thing I'd really like to see them supporting. That's where they can have deep influence. going to take a
Agree.
pause until my 11:30. I'm going to be 5 minutes.
Yeah, I was
late.
going to say, we can wrap
Let's
it up.
not stop, but let me just let her know.
Time goes fast.
I know it does.
Are you getting okay stuff here?
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you.
This is great.
Appreciate it.
Yes, no, this is great. Thank you.
Okay, let's stop at 11:35.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
let's talk about your book because I think that's an
Yeah, let's get that in. Yeah.
Right? A user's manual and citizen guide comes out in October. Who did you write it for? What did you want them to, close the last page thinking about? What was your thinking on that?
Thank you for that question. All right, here it is. I'm going to hold it up.
It's
just
beautiful.
because
It's
that's what we
beautiful.
do.
Yeah.
I wrote it for everybody. It's interesting. I started writing it thinking it was going to be more of a piece that would appeal to policymakers and people who think about shaping policy. But actually, what the book ended up being is an everyday user's guide. And it breaks down really what advocacy is as much as what menopause is. And I joke or sometimes, call it lovingly a choose your own adventure book, like the kind we Gen X read when we were little. Maybe kids today still do too. But I think the word advocate can sometimes stymie people or sway them in the other direction, thinking, oh, if I don't know anything about policy, I'm not political, I don't want to step in. That sounds big. That sounds scary. That sounds, public. And it's really intended to show how so much of what we do in our everyday lives, especially when it comes to treating and caring for and being our menopausal selves, can be advocacy. And sometimes it can benefit us personally, how we're interacting with our doctor, how we're navigating the shopping aisle, how we're maneuvering the internet, how we're dealing with our family members, older, younger, partners, everybody. So that's advocacy. So that's really the whole first section of the book is advocacy for yourself and, within your own orbit. The second section is advocacy and community, and it highlights all kinds of communities making menopause the center of discussion. I feature advocates or community, members, people, just people all over the country who are doing this through everything from public library initiatives to film screenings, to bringing people together to have, interesting, hard, enlightening conversations. And the workplace is actually where I focus on community also, thinking about the workplace as a really inevitable and necessary community for most of us for what are, likely our menopausal years, our perimenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal years. And then the final section of the book is maybe like my deepest heart and where I originally started, but that is advocating for the future, what it looks like to really step up into halls of power and halls of influence and make this demand. Because so much of this is happening at the state level now, I think there's something really inviting about that. Advocating for state legislative change is a lot less intimidating, perhaps, to folks than thinking about, Mr. Smith goes to Washington or walking up the steps to the halls of Congress. I always joke my state representative is my neighbor. I see her in the grocery store all the time. And, over the frozen food aisle, I will ask her what's going on with the menopause bills. She introduced 4 of them. They're really leaders, local and state leaders are really eager to hear from you. You are their lifeblood. This is how they have their job and keep their job and make their mark. And so I know that my state representative is so proud of the bills that she's championed, and people like me help, keep making that a reality for her. So the final part of the book really and gives all kinds of hands-on, user-friendly tools to how to do this in every avenue. So for the self, for the community, for the halls of government, the book is really practical. It features lots of stories and storytelling of people who've been doing this or people who've, had this experience and wanted to share, whether it was how they engaged with their mom or their daughter or their partner or their workplace or their PTA, or their book club or their state legislator, you name it. This book really gives a lot of, 3-dimensional, colorful energy about what it looks like to do that.
I can't wait to read it.
colorful
too.
energy. I really love that. Well, Jennifer, thank you for spending the time with us today and really for your book and breaking down advocacy in a tangible way that we can all advocate for ourselves in many different ways and aspects of our life. Thank you for that. I think this is the kind of conversation that turns the that's just how it is to that's about to change. And
That's about to change. I love
that
that.
is about to change.
It's
So
all
thank you
about to
for that.
change. Thank
Yeah.
you for all the work you both do too. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
Yes.
you.
And until we meet again, everyone, you can go pre-order the book. Yes, Jennifer, they can pre-order the book right now.
One more
Okay,
time.
perfect. Go pre-order the book, find out what's happening in your own state, advocate for yourself because odds are that there's something happening already.
And you'll make
it's
it happen if it hasn't yet.
and go make it happen. Use your voice. Yeah, speak up. And until we meet again, everyone, go find joy in the journey.
Thank you,
Take
Jennifer.
good care.
Thank you for listening to the Medovia Menopause Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for future episodes, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend. Medovia is out to change the narrative. Learn more at medovia.com. That's MIDOVIA.com.